Hello, this is America. So, Israel first or America first? America first, of course, you remember, was one of Donald Trump's big election-winning promises, along with no more wars. Now, best part of 18 months later, the US is involved in a war in Iran, with Israel leading some to ask, whose war is it? Is it America's? Is it Israel? And who benefits the most? We're going to be looking at that in more detail shortly. But first, Anna Burns-Francis.
Thanks, Phil. In a moment, we'll be joined by former Israeli negotiator Daniel Levy. He knows better than most what's driving Israel's desire to be part of the conflict with Iran. But there's more to it than just being a partner to this war. US President Donald Trump will tell you he made the call to attack Iran. It was his decision and that he is calling the shots. Many are now wondering, though, is there more to it than that? Israel's influence in American politics and decision-making has been steadily growing. Donald Trump is reportedly talking to Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu almost every day. And with both countries keeping up the campaign, the strikes and the retaliation are spilling across the Middle East. Take a listen to what Secretary of State Marco Rubio had to say just days into the conflict.
We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. There absolutely was an imminent threat. And the imminent threat was that we knew that if Iran was attacked, and we believed they would be attacked, that they would immediately come after us.
Well, that comment led many to suggest it was Israel that had dictated the decision to start the war. And while US officials recommended a limited military campaign, Israeli leaders are said to have decided on a much broader operation, hoping to reshape the entire region. Manu Rapalo has this report.
In almost 3 weeks of military campaign, the Trump administration has offered shifting timelines and changing goals. By contrast, Israel's objectives have been far more clearly defined.
We are crushing the nuclear infrastructure of Iran, the missile and launcher array, the repression headquarters, the regime's center of power, and many more targets.
In Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu faces political pressure as his coalition trails in the polls ahead of elections this year. For him, this war could erase the memory of the intelligence and security failings that led to the October 7th attacks, transforming the Israeli prime minister, at least in the eyes of his constituents, into a hero and protector after decades of promising to rid the region of an Iranian threat. Meanwhile, in the U.S., some argue President Trump's key promise to put America first has been overshadowed by Israel's military objectives. In a resignation letter penned this week by Joseph Kent, director of the U.S. Counterterrorism Center, he writes, "Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation, and it's clear that we started this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby." The Trump administration's inability to project a single unified message to the American people, as in previous U.S. incursions, has led to a growing number in the U.S. questioning what this war is even about.
It's rare for a U.S. military operation to begin with this level of public opposition. In the early days of the war in Afghanistan, for example, support topped 90%, and there was more than 70% support for the U.S. invasion of Iraq. But today, polling suggests that only about a quarter of Americans support U.S. strikes on Iran.
With a majority opposed, pressure on the Trump White House is mounting from all sides. Between an apparent asymmetry of vision between the U.S. and Israel and a promise by Iran to continue the fight, it's getting harder for the White House to bring this military action to a timely end. Manuel Rapalo, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Those two different visions for the war on Iran are coming sharply into focus, but which version will play out? Joining us from London to discuss is former Israeli negotiator and president of the US Middle East Institute, Daniel Levy. Daniel, thank you very much for your time. Let's get straight to the heart of it. Whose interests are being best served here, America's or Israel's?
Well, I don't want to neglect the idea, Anna, that only one side here has agency. Of course, the American side has agency, decision-making capacity. But as was pointed out, 7 visits in the first 13 months of this administration by Netanyahu with Trump, 2 trips to the US in the 8 weeks preceding this war, and Marco Rubio let the cat out the bag, and they've been trying to walk that back, that the imminent threat was something that Israel was about to do, not Iran. It is hard to come up with a coherent, realistic appraisal that suggests this is in America's interest. Maybe Trump thought he could do a quick Venezuela-style regime change, and he would put in a stable supplicant and have control of an important energy choke point and an important source of energy. That hasn't worked out, and I think most people who take this seriously knew it wouldn't work out. So the Israeli interest, which has more of a strategic depth to what it is trying to achieve, seems to be driving this. Netanyahu is apparently with his hands on the steering wheel, and what he's trying to do is establish what I think we can consider the Greater Israel project of domination. And part of the path to that is to collapse the state in Iran, and to hell with the consequences, whether it's for the Gulf states or for America itself and the political well-being of this American administration.
Can I ask, you brought up Marco Rubio there and his comments about how this conflict started. Was there a way the US could then have avoided getting dragged into it?
Absolutely, because if the US decides to assert a position with Israel, whether that's to desist from a genocide in Gaza, or whether that is to not conduct a military operation against Iran, which the US would then join, the US has the leverage to do so. Rather than do that, and I think here we have to acknowledge decades of US policy has gotten this region wrong. But then along comes the Trump administration, and Netanyahu sees a golden opportunity for the first time to drag an American president into his big war. And rather than say no, the president of the US, as he himself said, sends an armada to the region, puts the USS Gerald Ford off Israel's coast, and then Israel says, right, well, now you're ready, and now we're ready to launch our war. And Trump has actually, despite the fact they tried to walk back Rubio's comments, Trump has repeated them subsequently when in a recent press conference he said, well, maybe it was out of habit, and of course it was for Israel. And it was like, oh, you've said it again. And maybe what Netanyahu is partly doing, because he knows that that Israel first framing of the war has resonance in America. Maybe he knows that this is going to cost Israel more popularity, but maybe Netanyahu is saying, you use it before you lose it. Use this administration to do that big war that you had been planning, and use this administration before American decline sets in and multipolarity is the order of the day, with less American ability to assert itself militarily, as we see today.
Okay, you mentioned their greater Israel domination, and I want to maybe take it a little sideways here, but expand on that. Israel has an election coming up. So how is this conflict serving the country's best interest? To be blunt, if I can phrase it this way, is this an Israel war or is it a Netanyahu war?
To be blunter, Anna, is this the most expensive election campaign in history? Because we see the effect this is having on the global economy. We see the cost of fuel, fertilizer, food, and this will play out for a long time. You know what? I am never one to underestimate the role of domestic Israeli politics, the role of Netanyahu, his electoral needs, his needs as a man still up with very serious charges in a criminal court. But I'm going to say something, Anna, that argument is insufficiently compelling for me. I think Netanyahu is doing something broader, and I think it is something that there is a broad Zionist establishment, at least, consensus around in Israel. He has the support of the opposition parties. It may be smart politics, but it is part of a strategy that the Israeli side now has, which goes way beyond the ambition of the past. It's part of how come Israel is now launching a bigger occupation of South Lebanon again, occupying parts of Syria. And this is, I think, the thing that Israel will have to be walked back from, or the region, and I know the region is dealing with what is going on with Iran and Iran's response right now, but I think there is a very serious attempt here to assert hard power hegemony by Israel, regional domination that needs to be contained and deterred and goes well beyond the person of Netanyahu. Look at the leader of the opposition, Naftali Bennett, who's saying, after this war, the next war is Turkey.
All right, Daniel, I'm very sorry we have to leave it there. We've run out of time. Thank you so much for your insight and joining us on the program. Daniel Levy, President of the US Middle East Institute.
Thank you.
Well, the US media has picked up on the role America's relationship with Israel has on taking on Iran, with many questioning just who is benefiting from entering into the conflict. Phil's back in the newsroom with how it's all playing out.
Yeah, that is one of the questions that is getting a lot of attention in the US media. Which country predominantly benefits most from this conflict? Is it Israel? Is it America? Is it a combination of the two? Now, we're just going to rewind slightly to Tuesday because you'll remember the resignation of that top US intelligence official, Joe Kent. Donald Trump had talked about an imminent threat. This is the headline on the Associated Press. Top counterterrorism official Kent resigns over Trump's Iran war, says Iran posed no imminent threat. Now, this is why it's significant, because if you read his resignation letter, which AP's quoting, Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation, and it is clear that we started this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby. Next up, it is the conservative podcaster and influencer Megyn Kelly. She's asking, who is really in control here? Is it America? Is it Israel? I'll give you a hint. In her eyes, at least, it's not America.
So what does Israel do? Like, it's already been reported that Trump understands this decision has to be made in tandem with them, even though this is a country of 9 million and we have 350 million and we have our own concerns here. Apparently we're treating ourselves as equal partners in this thing as opposed to the senior partner.
Next up, it is the Wall Street Journal, and this leads into the perceived differences between Netanyahu and Trump. It says Israel and the US have different ideas on when to end the conflict and under what conditions. And it says the two men have spoken almost every day, adding all those talks center on the current state of the war and how to end it, the official said, as both countries try to bridge their differences in real time. Next up, it is foreign policy. And there's the headline there. No, Israel did not compel the US to wage war on Iran. And it asks the following question: why Netanyahu chose to strike Iran now? A question which it then appears to answer. Look, after threatening war for decades, the Israeli leader saw his window of opportunity closing. Next, we're going to go to NBC News. So it's got analysts and experts talking about the end game and the reason for this war starting. And there's what their experts say. It's really about regime change and that they need to fundamentally shake the regime so hard it largely breaks. And their expert goes on to say, we've heard some of that from the US, from President Trump, but we've heard a variety of goals, frankly. And finally, to The Economist, its podcast talks about regime change, but with a Latin American flavor. Take a listen.
Israel would like to see this war at least setting the ground for Iranian protesters to come out and sweep the regime away, while Trump wants a Venezuela outcome where basically the same regime is in place, but it's led by people who take orders from him.
So ultimately, whose interests are served most here? That is a question, and the answer will change depending on which outlet you're watching, which outlet you're listening to, which one you're reading. This is America through the lens of the US media.
US.
Correct.
Look at you.
While America and Israel may be keen to present as brothers in arms, the cracks are starting to show. Axios today reporting 3 White House aides believe the US president will want the war to end before Israel does. So, who will have the final say? On our panel today, we have David Sidney, a former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence, and Ariel Cohen, a Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre. Thank you both, gentlemen, for coming in. David, I'll start with you. Who is determining the direction of this war at the moment?
Well, if you ask President Trump, he is. But if you look at the reality,
what if I ask you?
But if you look at the reality, it appears that Prime Minister Netanyahu really has huge influence over Trump and has been using it very effectively. I think we'll only know the final answer maybe when historians do it. But certainly it is not just President Trump and his feeling in his bones that's making this decision. There's more going on here than meets the eye in this relationship.
Let's talk about that, Ariel, because David's just mentioned having the upper hand. Who has, or the influence rather, but who has the upper hand then in the relationship between America and Israel?
Clearly it's the United States.
Yeah.
The United States is the global superpower. It has a huge nuclear arsenal. It has a presence in the Middle East, which is much, much bigger than Israel. Israel has good intelligence, that's for sure. But in terms of strategic goals, look, we're dealing with a regime in Iran that for 47 years said what? Death to Israel, death to America, building the nuclear arsenal, building the ballistic missiles, funding, training, equipping proxies. This was a real threat. And I think, and the Gulf states now recognize that the threat from the Iran was not just for Israel, it was for the Gulf states and eventually for Europe and the United States.
But we talk about things being an imminent threat or a real threat, and it is a value-based measurement. There is no real measurement that has been assigned to this. And so when people look at the justification and we look at, well, how far away out was, Tulsi Gabbard comes on and says, no, there was not the imminent threat of a nuclear weapon. Or the IAEA comes in and says, we didn't see evidence of that.
IAEA, Mr. Grossi, whom I met, said, we cannot certify that this is a peaceful program. Now, IAEA
it doesn't mean it's a
is an
dangerous
international organization,
Sure.
and Mr. Grossi is limited to what he can say. To me, to say we cannot certify it's a peaceful program means, translate, from bureaucraties,
well,
it's
the
a
problem,
military
right?
program.
It's open to interpretation. David, you want to jump in
I think that kind of discussion gets you lost in the minutia.
Yeah.
What's really important here is the fact that the United States has an irrational president. He makes decisions that people, including people around him, don't understand. I'll put out his relationship with President Putin of Russia, where he goes into meetings expecting one thing and he comes out spouting the Russian line. Prime Minister Netanyahu appears to have some of the same influence. So I would agree with Ariel on the broader strategic things. The minutia of what's an imminent threat and all that, I think, is sort of irrelevant, because what's really relevant is what's happening in the mind of President Trump, and I sincerely believe he is irrational and is subject to manipulation by Netanyahu.
I respectfully disagree with my friend David here, because I think Trump brings the sort of New York business community sensibilities that are very alien to David and I, being a part of the Washington swamp for a long time.
Right, okay, because this is bigger than that, right?
An important distinction here. The way Trump looks at it, in my opinion, through the prism of China. China is a peer competitor of the United States. Venezuela and Iran were the junior partners in that axis. Russia is an important part of that. And yes, I too, as somebody who was born in Ukraine, who is suffering to look at the cities that I see, that I knew as a child being bombed, I feel the pain. But in the long term, for Trump, the big game is China, and taking Iran with Iranian oil off the playing field in that game is very important.
Okay, that is another can of worms, obviously. and there is a whole lot to the price of oil that will be terrible for the US economy and the price and where it goes, particularly with an election coming up. But can we go back just a step here and narrow back down on the relationship here, David? Because Trump tweeted at the end of the 12-day war last year that this was a war that could have gone on for years and it could have destroyed the entire Middle East. But it didn't, and it never will. So how come the US didn't step in and stop this from going further this time?
Well, President Trump has made a big rhetorical point that 47 years, no other president did that.
Yeah.
Well, that includes 5 years with him as president. He didn't do it during his first term or his first year in office. So it's not because he just finally developed the bravery to do something nobody else could ever do before him. In my view, he was manipulated by the Israelis to do something that was not in the long-term U.S. strategic interest. Was Iran the threat that Ariel describes? Yes, it was. But administration has made the calculation that what happens after the U.S. attacks, what happens after Israel attacks, is more dangerous than the current situation. Just because things are bad doesn't mean they can get worse. And I believe all indications are that where Iran is going to end up after this is going to be much more dangerous to the U.S., much more dangerous to Israel than it was 2 weeks ago.
And that will depend on how the US and Israel get out of this conflict, right? Because Donald Trump's press secretary has been explicit about his ownership of the conflict. These were her comments just over a week ago.
And so the president, again, as I have reiterated, and he has said, was not going to sit back and allow the Iranian regime to threaten or to attack the United States of America any longer.
Can we talk about a report here, Ariel, that's come out that says that Israel, after hitting Iranian gas fields and seeing Iran retaliate through Saudi and other places in the GCC, that the US has reportedly asked Israel not to target Iranian oil again without it say-so.
Absolutely. First of all, the oil prices, while they jumped to close to 40%, historically, we're still, if you look at 2014 or something like that, we're in the $80 range historically. It's not going to destroy American economy or global economy.
Tell that to the voters who see the price of gas going up.
No, Trump is focused as a laser on his midterms. The midterms are going to be brutal. He may lose the House. And for him, bringing this war to an end sooner rather than later is politically very important. As to the Middle East, I think the war demonstrated that Iran became a real and present danger to the Gulf states.
Okay.
In the past, they thought, well, maybe it's not going to happen. It's happening now as we speak. And the Gulf states have to take part in this operation with the United States and with Israel to protect themselves.
I know everyone has a reckon, and certainly you two gentlemen will have far more qualifications than myself. But if we look at what top intelligence aides have said and bosses, and we refer to Joe Kent, who quit yesterday quite publicly over his position that Iran was not an imminent threat. He also, David, pointed out that he made the point that he believes it was clear that the war was started due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby. Do you think the American public has a fulsome or comprehensive understanding of how that relationship works, given the polling we have seen about its support, or rather lack of, for this conflict?
No, the American public really does not understand this because it's not been explained to them effectively by any American leader. And I think the polls in Israel show something like 80+% support for this war. Well, the polls in the U.S. are going down, and maybe 30% or so of Americans will support this war, and it'll keep going down. So there are fundamentally different strategic interests and different timelines for the U.S. and Israel here. The Israeli timeline is immediate. The Israeli timeline is national survival. Iran doesn't threaten the U.S. national survival. It does threaten Israel's national survival. So, of course, their goals are different. The U.S. has been able to control Israel in the past. That's no longer the case.
David's just pointed out the goals of each country are different here. And so if the goals are different, Ariel, how does one or two countries get out of this conflict? Where is the end game going if they have different objectives they want to achieve?
First of all, a regime that builds ballistic arsenal and enriches uranium, as the Iranian representative told Witkoff, to 60%, will not ever stop at Israel. Okay, number one. Number two, the Israeli-American relationship, while it's not a treaty alliance, it is a very close partnership, and it's a close alliance. So for the United States to sit there and watch at a potential existential threat, as David said, to Israel is unacceptable. And finally, in terms of getting out of it, the purpose, and President Trump said it repeatedly, the purpose of this war is to degrade the Iranian nuclear and ballistic missile potential, to defang that regime. Whether that regime will survive or not, we don't know yet. But it won't be in the position to threaten Gulf states, Israel, Europe, etc. And sooner or later, the Iranian remaining leadership, because a lot of these people were already eliminated, will come to a conclusion that it's time for them to stop.
Is that the same end goal, though, in its totality as Israel? We have seen, I think it's been described as an assassination campaign, or strategy rather, today with earlier guests, about how Israel is carrying out the number of targeted killings of senior Iranian leadership members. And so that is not directly striking a military or a nuclear facility, which is what the US seems to be focused on.
It's taking out a leadership that directed the programs of ballistic arsenal, of their proxies, terrorist organizations. For 47 years, the Iranians are running around the world, murdering domestic opponents, murdering the Jewish community in Argentina, attacking Israel through proxies, etc. So sooner or later, that leadership...
The foreign minister, though, has pointed out, Abbas Araghchi has said, this is not one person here and one person over there. You fail to understand, if you do not accept that there is an entire structure here that keeps going, the machine keeps running, you fail to understand how to win this war.
Sooner or later, that leadership will come to its senses, because the price of their paying in terms of the oil infrastructure, in terms of their military-industrial complex, in terms of the nuclear enrichment facility, the price will be too high. They will need to stop, and promised what President Trump said. Stop. Let me finish. Stop enriching, stop building ballistic missiles, and stop funding the proxies.
Can we talk about that, David? The price will be too high for America at some point, won't it?
Well, the price for America is going to be too high for America to bear, well before it's too high for Israel to bear. With all due respect to my friend Ariel, we have very different perspectives on this. And I believe that the policies followed by past administrations, including by President Trump for 5 years, of understanding that a fragmented, perhaps fractured Iran at civil war, all kinds of possibilities that are worse than what's happening right now, is worse for U.S. long-term strategic interest than what was the case before.
Yeah.
It wasn't the case for
Ariel, I'm so sorry. And I appreciate I needed to let David have a point there. Thank you both, gentlemen. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, the question of whose interest the Iran war serves has been fodder for social media on Capitol Hill and across the wider US. Here's Alex Baird with how the narrative's been playing out online.
Well, this debate has deep roots. Let's go back to June last year, just hours after Israel launched a surprise strike against Iran. Conservative influencer Charlie Kirk asking if the US should get involved. Around 90% said no. Kirk was later shot dead, but that sentiment lives on. After the outbreak of war earlier this year, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth let this slip.
To our steadfast partner, Israel, your mission is being executed with unmatched skill and iron.
That line, your mission is being executed, fuel to the fire, as to whether this war is Israel or America first. Democrat Bernie Sanders saying Netanyahu wanted war with Iran and Trump just gave it to him. Across the conservative spectrum, commentators like Candace Owens framing the war as serving Israel, or as she calls it, World War BB. The cracks laid bare with this resignation letter from Joe Kent, the head of the National Counterterrorism Center. But like most things in the States, fractures are everywhere. White House press sec Caroline Leavitt responding with this, ending that the war is America first. Other conservative voices like Mark Levin maintaining this is America's operation, but in lockstep with its closest ally, Israel. Some on the right claiming instead that the Israel first narrative is a distraction, simply an attempt to split the right.
Well, that's all for now from Washington, D.C. On This Is America, we'll keep following the decisions that shape the US and influence the world. And now we'll head back to Al Jazeera's global headquarters in Doha. Thanks for watching.